We're gonna can't hear from Brittany Craft to everyone. Amelia, you can hear us, right? Good. Brittany, you might want to check your speakers on your computers. We got another one that there's no audio.
Yeah, I think it's the individual computers. You guys might want to check your speakers or your audio, because we have audio over here.
Okay. And just so everybody knows, we are going to be recording this, and we will. Thank you guys for talking in the chat that you can hear us. I appreciate it. So again, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to get started in a few minutes, just a few housekeeping things. If you can't hear us, you do definitely want to check the audio on your system. My name is Erin Nickerson, and we're going to get started in a few more minutes. We will be recording this. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to open up the chat button at the bottom of your screen and type in your questions as we go. We're going to be covering a lot of different topics. And if we see stuff that pertains to exactly what we're talking about, we'll get to it. And then we are going to have the Q&A session for specific questions at the end. If it is a property specific question that you have an issue that we don't address on here, we will be sending out specific answers to anybody that has those questions after this via email, or you can feel free to call us individually as well. So let's get started. Again, my name is Erin Nickerson with the Rapid Response Team, and thank you for being here. This expert panel is really designed to cover everything when it comes to water damage, from the insurance perspective, the legal perspective, and then the operational perspective of how these things should work moving forward in your community associations. So I'm Erin with the Rapid Response Team. We are a licensed general contractor that specializes in emergency services, water damage, fire, mold, and storm damage. And we can start you from the day of your loss and repair you through all the way through to get you back to the pre-loss condition. I'd like to start by introducing our attorney that's going to be on the call today, Paula Mara from Rosenbaum, PLLC.
Thanks, Erin. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and looking forward to the next hour of explaining the ins and outs of water damage and how that applies to your community association, and the basic takeaway points on what you do first, and then how you should address that with insurance. And of course, immediately. So we'll get into the details of that. I'm Paula Mara. Thank you, Erin, and thank you, Matt, for joining me today. I am at Rosenbaum Law Firm. We are an association law firm. We cover everything with respect to general corporate counsel, litigation, anything that you need for your association, both condos, co-ops, and homeowners association, and some country clubs as well. I've practiced for 21 years in Florida, solely focused on community association law. So thank you, and looking forward to getting started.
Thank you, Paula. And Matt, would you like to introduce yourself next?
All right. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Matt Reedy with Plastridge Insurance. We're a 104-year-old agency, one of the community association specialists on the team. We represent roughly 1,200 condos, HOAs, and co-ops throughout South Florida.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. So I'm going to jump right in because we've already got questions in the chat, and we have quite a few questions that have already been submitted about this particular thing. But I deal with water damage every single day. And I want to talk about first what happens when water damage occurs. The first thing that we need to do when a water damage situation happens is to stop the bleed, find out where the water is coming from, and then make the necessary repair to make that water stop. And it's not a matter of when it first happens, who's responsible for what. It's stopping the actual issue that's happening. And the majority types of claims and floods and leaks that we have are going to be in our condominiums, unit owner to unit owner, maybe a defective hot water heater, an AC condensate line, or maybe it's something larger. Maybe the roof of the building got struck by lightning and hit 22 all the way down to 1. Mm-hmm. So really, when we're talking about who's responsible for what, we need to understand what is causing the leak to the building, what is causing the leak to the unit, and where is that water coming from, and what type of water are we dealing with? Is it clean or is it dirty? Because how we react to that water depends on where it's coming from. If it's a clean water source, maybe it's an AC condensate line or a broken toilet tank or a hot water heater, clean water can be dried. If it's a grossly contaminated source, we call it category 3 water coming from maybe a mainline drain backup, a toilet bowl overflow, and maybe it's something that involves a biohazardous waste or mold. That water cannot be dried and must be removed and replaced. And your insurance company wants to see that removal and replacement, and your attorney wants to see that removal and replacement because it minimizes the liability of somebody getting sick or for secondary damages to happen. So once you've identified what the actual problem is, the number one question we always get is who is at fault and who is paying for the bill. Matt, can you talk about how this is determined from the claim and the insurance side aspect of it first?
Yeah, so it's a good place to start. I figured I'd give my best attorney impersonation to start and say it just depends. It depends on all the things that you just described. Where's the water coming from? What type of water is it? What's actually being damaged? One of the helpful things with Florida that I've seen is we have it set up with the statute where everybody's responsible for their own in the absence of negligence. So let's pretend we've got a 3-story building, the pipe bursts in the wall on the 3rd floor, goes all the way down. Realistically, we're going to be looking and filing 4 different claims in that scenario, one for the association and then one for each of the unit owners that are affected. Now that's in a bubble. We'll probably get into it a little bit here on when is it worth filing a claim, but let's just assume it's so obvious that everybody's going to have to file one. Everybody would be filing the claim under their own policy, and it's later for the companies to determine, the insurance companies to determine if they want to subrogate on any of those and us try to assign negligence to one of the additional parties. But that's in a nutshell the starting point for it.
And just to emphasize, if you have unit owners that do not have insurance policies, that insurance process can't happen and they're essentially self-insuring. So they are going to be responsible for their own damages. And when we talk about damages, we talk about them according to, in the condo and co-op world, according to statute 718.111 subsection 10. I'm going to let Paula kind of jump in here and really explain what that actually means from the attorney perspective.
From the legal perspective, and it happens obviously frequently with respect to, we have 2 stories or more, damage occurring from the upper story down to the lower story, or damage, as you mentioned, Aaron, even from the association's point of view for a roof or other common element, creating damage down through the unit. Yes, if you do not have an HO6 policy and you are the owner that the damage is stemming from, you could be subject to liability and personally be responsible for that damage claim because you don't have an HO6 policy. Ultimately, the damages are going to go back to whether or not there was negligence involved. However, from a legal perspective, it's very difficult once your water heater breaks or something goes wrong with your whatever, it's a sink overflow, it's a toilet overflow. It's very difficult to take the position that the owner was not negligent with respect to that water event. So taking it from a perspective of, do you have an HO6 policy? Years ago, over a decade ago, 718 and 719 were amended to provide specifically that owners were required to have an HO6 policy. That was amended back out a few years after that. So if you, as an association, one of the wisest things that we can do is require owners to carry an HO6 policy for your condo. This is especially important when, again, you have more than one floor. If you have 2 units, 3 units stacked floors, then you're going to have, as your association ages, your condominium building ages, you're going to have water events, and that is going to create both liability for the association with respect to, of course, we all know with respect to 718, the association is responsible for the drywall out. So that envelope of your unit is the unfinished surface of the drywall in. One of the important things we talk about when we talk about the immediacy of a water event is, what does the association do? The first thing the association should recognize is that drywall damage will be the association's obligation to immediately go in and repair. Even though that owner may have been negligent, we're going to look at that as the next step. But the obligation to immediately repair, address, as Aaron mentioned, with respect to what type of water is that? Is that a Cat 3 water? Is it something we can dry out? But that is something the association, by or through their management, is going to go in and immediately address. So keep that in mind with respect to the association's obligation, and then looking at the negligence piece of that later. Who's responsible now that we have went in and maintained the obligation to repair that drywall or dry that surface out?
I'll just make a quick comment, and going back to the unit owners, they're never uninsured. They are self-insured. And from my chair, some of the ugliest claims that I've seen have been the ones where owners don't have a policy and it's a significant loss, and they either don't want to pay for it or can't pay for it. And then you can end up with an 8th grade science project growing in somebody's unit, and it just gets out of control from there. So it's important for the association to step in and protect the asset when the owners can't. But those have been the ugly situations. So if you are in an association that you can get it and make it a requirement for owners to carry that policy, it's really helped avoid those scenarios. Aaron and I have had losses specifically. I won't name anybody on this one, but where owners just have completely failed. They've thrown people out of the units and just let it fester for months. And it becomes significantly more expensive when you have mold growth for months versus when you can just treat water in a couple of days.
Absolutely. It's always cheaper to mitigate than to remediate mold. I do want to give you guys a scenario that we can work around too. Yesterday, I got a call from a property manager who's also on this call, and they had a contractor in their building who hit a fire sprinkler head. It went from the 17th floor all the way down to the 1st floor. It was a general contractor, and the subcontractor plumber is the one that caused the issue. Now, my property manager did not want to sign for the mitigation in her building. She wanted to force the contractor to do that. And this is going to be a fun going into Paula's situation, but I want to talk about the claims process. The association has an obligation to act as soon as they find out that water damage has occurred. Water damage is an emergency situation according to your documents, and that you have the irrevocable right to take action to stop the bleed and to make sure mitigation happens. What happens if the unit owners aren't there and they don't know about this? So it's really important that you understand that you do have an obligation as a board member and as an association to take action when the situation occurs. And I want to talk about the claims reporting process and what you'll need in order to report a claim and to file a claim correctly. From the restoration standpoint, when you work with a reputable company, we document the crap out of everything, and we provide you with several key pieces: photo documentation on the first day, and then throughout the entire process on a daily basis. We have dry logs that are also going to substantiate the work that we do. The work that we do is actual science. We have laws, rules, and regulations and licenses that we have to maintain and we have to report on. So what we do is also monitored. It is not just a maintenance guy throwing in a fan and a DU and hoping for the best. That's not how you get paid from an insurance claim, and it's not how your attorney can help recoup funds should you go that route. Matt, what are the other things that they'll need from the insurance side to file a claim correctly?
Yeah, so by the time it's time to file a claim or even talk about it, I'm very rarely getting called when the water's still flowing. So it's oftentimes a day or maybe 2 days afterwards, and the client calls me, says, hey, we had an incident, we've got water. First thing we do is we start looking at the policy to see what the deductible is. If you're in a high rise, it's even spread to a lot of our garden style condos, we're seeing a lot of higher water damage deductibles. But that's the first point for me, is let's have the conversation about the deductible, see if we can identify if this is going to be a large enough claim over the deductible in order to justify filing that claim. We'll probably get into the should you, shouldn't you in a little bit, but once, let's pretend we do identify it's a big one. We know we're gonna file it no matter what. Start getting the documentation. To Aaron's point, if you're working with a good contractor, they're going to be documenting the loss. They're going to be taking pictures. You don't want to discard. Well, you got to get rid of the mold, but you don't want to discard as much of the material as you can get away from. The adjuster that the company will likely send on site has the opportunity to review the area before any permanent repairs are made. So you can certainly make your temporary repairs. You can do permanent repairs if justifiable. So say like, it's not a water damage claim, but let's pretend the elevator was down for a surge. You can certainly make all of your permanent repairs because you got to get the building back up and running. But it starts with the conversation, identifying exactly what's happened, getting the documentation from the reputable contractor, and then our claims team gets it sent over to the company.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And my favorite part is the world that we live in now with insurance, right? Should I file a claim? Is my premium going to go up? Do I have a loss history as an association that is astronomical? Do I have a $2,500 deductible? Do I have a $25,000 deductible? So a lot of my clients now are turning the other direction, and they're choosing to get their attorney involved day one rather than file a claim, which is a great resource. And this is going to actually address a lot of the things that are in the group chat over here. So when, Paula, should we get the attorney involved in a water damage incident?
If you have a substantial incident where, well, let's back up a minute, because what we should be doing certainly as a board is have a protocol. First and foremost, you're going to have Erin retained from rapid response to address those. You're going to be able to make a quick phone call and she's going to know who you are immediately because you've already spoken to her and retained her services for immediate attention to the water. I see in the chat question about the association's obligation. So starting from that point, when we have a condo or a co-op, the association's obligation to remediate and address that water issue is as soon as you know about that water issue. And so you start mitigating it from that point. We oftentimes see that the first phone call to our desk, myself or my colleague, Steve Brayton, is upon the owner not allowing access. So certainly takeaway point today is the association has immediate access to address that emergency water damage issue. And it is absolutely the association's obligation with respect to the surfaces, the unfinished surface of the drywall out. So the association, once a water damage issue occurs, whether it's association's issue stemming from the common element, or it's an owner issue with respect to their negligence or otherwise, the association is involved from the time that that damage starts. At that point in time, again, the calls we get, unfortunately, are when there's not a strict protocol in place from the management level or from the board level, or there's a lot of confusion and the owner is not allowing access into the unit. You do have access. The association has access according to 718. Going back to, again, protocol, do we have keys? Are we going to have to call a locksmith? What is happening? Do we need to stop the water from occurring? Yes, you have emergency access. And with respect to the remediation of that and the cleaning up, you also have access for that as well. Sometimes when we get to that stage, we will send a letter to the owner indicating that there had been a water event. We know that there is still are issues with respect to that event and we need access. When an owner denies access, as Matt mentioned, that is when the mold starts occurring. And then we have bigger legal issues. So the immediacy of this is important. Calling your attorney 3 weeks after the owner has told the manager that they're not coming in the unit is bad. Then you have the mold issues. So access is important. The association has immediate access, and it is the association's obligation with respect to that drywall out for those common element. When we talk about I love scary stories. Erin mentioned one as well with the HO6 policy. Other scary stories are you don't have an HO6 policy and your contractor is doing work, regular plumbing work in your unit, and that pipe burst later and there's damage all the way down to the entire elevator shaft, resulting in $150,000 of common element damage. So that if you don't have that HO6 policy, the association is coming directly after that particular owner. So keep that in mind as well.
I also want to beat this with a dead horse. Make sure that you are using licensed and insured contractors when doing work in your units. Most associations require that. As a contractor, I provide all of my clients with an additional insured certificate before I enter their building, naming the building as an additional insured. That's really important for associations to understand that if a contractor is doing work in your building and you're named as a certificate holder and additional insured, you can actually file a claim on their insurance policy because you're named. If you don't have that, you cannot file that. So that's a huge perk, especially for my high-rise buildings, my buildings on the beach, anybody that's doing work in your building, you should be requiring that. And your unit owners should be providing that to you for their contractors as well.
And I just want to throw this in there because this happens a lot as well. And I know it's not going to be a topic that's really favored, but when we have on-site maintenance employees for the association and they have developed relationships with individual owners and the association board has condoned or allowed those maintenance individuals to go in and work in the unit. The elevator shaft example that I gave you was actually an employee of the association. So back to Aaron's point, using licensed contractors, and also it would be our advice, the attorney's advice, to not allow the association's employee maintenance employees to actually work within individual owners' units for that reason.
Thank you, Paula. One of the biggest questions that comes up is who's responsible for what? Matt, let's first touch on mold and how that's handled by the insurance company.
Well, that's a trick question.
I know.
Mold is always a tough one because there's a couple policies that end up coming into play. The property is obviously first. A lot of these policies are going to have sublimits on how much mold coverage they'll actually provide you. The ISO form, which is the standardized form, provides 15,000, and a lot of the policies don't provide anything over that. Mold also gets tricky because by the time we're talking about mold, this is something that has probably sat for a while. Normally, when clients ask me about potential claims, one of the key phrases I use is sudden and accidental. If somebody has a leaky pipe in the wall and they don't notice it behind the cabinets and it leaks for 3 months and then you finally discover the mold, that's not exactly a sudden and accidental type of event. So it can get a little hairy. It does give an adjuster more wiggle room than I would like in order to deny claims like this, but typically there is at least the sublimit of about 15,000. You can get, if you've had issues of it in the past, it's harder to get it, but there are monoline policies that are available that can get you slightly higher limits. Like one of the ones we use quite frequently is a $25,000 limit per occurrence and a $50,000 aggregate. It's not a lot more, but it's at least more than the 15,000 a lot of these policies are going to cover. The personal lines, I can't speak to it as well. I know enough about personal lines, but they have the same exact issues on those policies where you're going to have sublimits on it. And again, it gets tricky on exactly how did the damage occur and how long has it been there, and it gives them more wiggle room. I will touch quickly on liability. So we see a lot of claims where owners have mold in their unit, and then they hire an attorney to sue the association, alleging that the association's actions are what caused the mold. A lot of our general liability policies have mold and fungus exclusions. So we see those get denied by the general liability policies. And, sometimes it kind of depends on how the attorney for that owner is going to file the claim and how they word it. Because if they say mold, company can then divert it back to that exclusion and try to get out of it. And that creates some ugly dust-ups between the owners and the insurance companies as well. So there's a couple different pitfalls and different directions we can go with when we're talking about mold and association.
And where I see it from my side operationally is there's two sides to the claim. In order for there to actually be a claim, there has to be an incident that occurs that creates the mold. So if your unit owners are snowbirds and they're coming back from a 6-month vacation and they've got growth all over their nice Louis Vuitton bags, couches that are super expensive, and that's a humidity issue, that's not going to be a claim that the insurance company is going to pick up. There has to be an incident like a storm, a leak, a flood that creates that growth to happen. And I do want to remind all of our unit owners and our board members on this call that if you do have an HO6 policy, if you are gone for more than 2 weeks from your unit and you do not have a licensed service checking on your unit, your claim will be denied. You cannot be out of your unit for an extended period of time and file claims when you're not there. It's the most common thing that I see when my clients go, and the insurance company will try to trip you up. They're in the business of making money. They're not in the business of helping you as the unit owner. So don't ever tell them that you were gone for 6 months and now you have a mold issue, because they will flat out deny you every time. Paula, where does the fault for items like ice maker, leaks from bad toilet rings, unit owner to unit owner, responsible maintained item losses occur? That's a common question that we have in here.
Right. So with respect to, again, going back to, you have a unit that has the leak event, and then you have the unit below it or beside it that experiences damage as well. That individual where the leak occurred will be responsible for the other units. We like to talk about whether it was negligence or whether it was or not, but at the end of the day, that damage occurred between unit to unit. So it's going to be that unit owner where the leak event occurred. When we talk about negligence, whether or not you have, one of the common ones that Aaron just mentioned is the toilet ring. So it's deemed to be negligent if you have it so rotted out that it hasn't been replaced and you weren't aware of it. Because again, you were either absent or you just weren't paying attention to it, or those types of leak events. That's the great thing about water. It's going to go where it goes. And typically we don't have a lot of notice. The water heater also very common. So the position would be that you're negligent with respect to the fact that your water heater was at an age it should have been replaced in the first place. So those types of things, we're going to look right back to the unit owner where the event occurred. If you have an HO6 policy and the event occurred in the unit above you, your HO6 is going to cover the interior damage to your unit. And then the HO6 is going to look back at that particular unit owner where the event occurred and subrogate those damages back to that unit owner. So that's very common as well. For the association, I saw something in the chat where there was some confusion with respect to the drywall, and it's the unfinished surface of the drywall. So for example, if I have my beautiful bathroom and I have some amazing wallpaper and the damage occurs from the unit above and to in my bathroom, the association should immediately address and understand that drywall damage needs to be remediated by the association. So when they know, the association board or manager knows and understands that that event occurred, it's the association's obligation, even though it may have been the negligence of the upstairs unit owner. The association will go in, repair that drywall. So when I say unfinished surface of the drywall out, or the slab of the floor down, or the surface of the ceiling up, those are typically the parametrical boundaries of a unit. Typically, your parametrical boundaries are going to be defined both in your declaration and also for insurance purposes by statute, by 718. So a couple different things. There's a couple different moving parts here that the association needs to understand. But again, back to my beautiful wallpaper example, that wallpaper is the owner's obligation. The association will not be responsible for your gorgeous wallpaper. It will only be responsible to immediately go in, remediate, and potentially even put the insurance agent carrier on notice that there was a water event, not necessarily filing a claim, but on notice that there was water event, just in case 3 months down the road, something occurred and now there's a huge mold issue that because the remediation didn't happen correctly. So again, it's surface of the drywall, unfinished surface of the drywall, and anything on the interior, paint, the molding on the floor. I can't even think of the word.
I mean, I will list off a whole list of topics.
Right.
Unit owner
So
responsibility.
that's the major confusion that occurs. And that confusion then results in the association not understanding that it has to go in there and start the remediation process for the drywall.
Absolutely. So just to be super clear with this, it's drywall up until paint ready. So paint, baseboards, crown molding, tile, carpet pad, tack strips, any decorative finishes, plaster, anything wallpaper on the walls, and then going into the unit, your contents of your unit, we call it in the restoration world. All of that is going to be the unit owner's responsibility for repair and replacement, no matter where the water is coming from, no matter whose fault it is. And if you have an HO6 policy, you should have coverage for all of those items.
And then just following up with that, it's going to be the obligation, the responsibility, just as Aaron explained. However, if the association was negligent with respect to addressing that water issue immediately, and the claim is all the mold on my beautiful piano is because the association ignored the calls, ignored the fact that they needed to go in and remediate that drywall, even though it was someone else's fault. Keep in mind, even though the bathtub overflowed and it was my fault as a unit owner, you're still going in as an association to repair that drywall and remediate that particular portion
A
of it.
good question for you.
Yes.
So if an association roof is leaking for over a year and it causes a mold problem inside of a unit, I, you already know what I'm talking about. And it causes a mold problem inside of a unit for over a year, and who would be responsible for that remediation, even though it may be a unit owner item per se that's damaged? Would it be the association's responsibility to repair it?
So if the association, the way I would counsel a client to handle that, if it's the association that ignored the roof leak and it's occurred and then it's damage to the unit, again, specific facts would come into play as well with how I would counsel a client. But the association needs to go, again, it's going to be drywall, the unfinished surface out. The other remediation really should come through the individual unit owner, within the individual unit owner claiming damages against the association. However, when these types of events occur, it wasn't, let me give you an example. It wasn't water damage, it was a rat infestation. And the unit owner, of course, immediately contacted their legal counsel, and we worked through that to have the association bear the burden of remediating and cleaning their individual contents. So those types of things are very fluid. When we can work with an owner to address what has occurred and we know it's pretty clear the association was negligent, we're going to do whatever we can to address that, even including cleaning the contents, again, using licensed contractors to do so, and then getting releases. Being obstinate in that set of circumstances is exactly where the association should not be. The rat example I just gave you ended up being a $100,000 claim because the association in this event refused to clean the sofa and pay $10,000. So those types of things can spin out of control very quickly. You do want to consult and contact legal counsel so they can counsel you. And you also want to keep an open mind that sometimes at the outset of it, settling the matter as opposed to letting it go further may be in the best interest from a business point of view for the association, as opposed to arguing about who is responsible for that particular water damage or other event. Yes, the association's roof was leaking, but again, you had a snowbird with nobody checking the unit, which then resulted in the entire unit being covered with mold because nobody knew about it. So those types of things, again, circumstances, the facts, we move through those and we make sure from a business point of view, we're putting the association in the best position.
I'm in agreement 100% with you, Paula. It's not always the right way to go and taking a hard stance. Sometimes things are complicated, and at the end of the day, a legal bill or a subrogation claim against the association can cost the association a lot more money and a lot more headache than just doing a remediation with me and actually controlling the cost of the project from the beginning. It's something that we don't think about, but you need to be a little bit more open-minded about as a business. What is the best financial situation long-term? I want to talk about hurricanes. So we are in the heart of hurricane season. We've got 4 storms out there. I'm like, don't come here. But after last year, I think it's really important to talk about what happens to us if we get a storm that hits the Tri-County. We've been really, really lucky. We haven't had anything major in a long time. So our unit owners are lulled into this false sense of security. And as property managers and board members, we want to make sure that you understand when we get hit, what the protocol needs to be for you as an association to get yourself back and up and running, and what you need to have is a plan in place today to make sure that that happens. Working with a restoration partner like myself or whoever your choice partner is, having a plan with them, being on a preferred vendor list, a preferred client list, and asking the question, where do I fall? Am I number 1 because I have 20 million leaks every year, or am I at the bottom because I never really call you when I do all my stuff in-house? So it's important to have those conversations today and to sign agreements. No exchange of money is necessary with these restoration contractors to get on lists, and please don't ever pay for them because it's just not necessary, and anybody that charges you should not be. So Matt, I want to kind of have you chime in first on this. When it comes to storm recovery, when should somebody from the insurance standpoint call a restoration company to come in?
When should somebody from the insurance company call the restoration
No,
company?
association.
When it's the association? Well, I mean, as soon as you have any signs of water damage, you should be having somebody get involved. You already hit the nail on the head where when I talk about pre-storm preparation with clients, the first thing is have contracts in place today. Roofing, restoration, debris cleanup, have a plan in place. The really ugly truth is when the hurricane comes through and you're trying to get somebody to come put a tarp on your roof, contractors are already going to be prioritizing their existing clients, let alone somebody who's never spoken with them before in their lives. You're going to end up at the mercy of whichever random roofer decides to get in a truck and drive down. And those are where the real horror stories come from, where you give deposits to contractors that ghost you in the middle of the night. So having those plans in place and knowing who you're going to work with and you have the time now to interview the contractor and decide who you're going to trust in that moment when you need them. So have the plan in place, but as soon as there's any sign of damage, you want to have somebody out there. I would say even after the storm, have your roofer come out, have your restoration contractor come out. If there's even any warning signs, some of the biggest claims I had after Hurricane Irma were roof tiles. There were just a couple scattered roof tiles missing from around roofs. And then when the roofer was up on there, they found that there were more areas compromised. If they hadn't been thorough, when they thought it was no big deal, they told me originally, Nat, don't file a claim. We have no issues. And then they ended up having half the roofs replaced in an 18 building community. So I've certainly seen those, but you want to get somebody involved to do an inspection of your premises, especially if it's a direct hit. Go back, use Irma on the client I just mentioned. That Irma was on the other side of the state, and they still had significant damage that wasn't immediately visible after the storm. Now, the practice had been for a long time. We went 11 years without a hurricane, so filing claims was not always as, I'm trying to find the right word to say it. We weren't always as skeptical on filing potentially unnecessary claims as I would be today. And a lot of us had calendar year hurricane deductibles. So when you have a calendar hurricane deductible, that deductible can stack, whether it's 1, 2, or 5 storms. If you're a per occurrence deductible, it may not make sense to file something that we know is going to get nowhere near, the $1 million deductible that we may have. But at the end of the day, every claim is going to be a little bit different. Depends on where the damage is, what we find. You have time after the storms. They changed the statute. Is it 2 years now to file a claim after a hurricane? I know they were talking about maybe doing 1 year, but I think that was too dramatic and they got rid of it. But
Yeah, we're going to talk about those statutes in a minute.
yeah,
One thing
so
I
I've
think
got all
that-
the old rules stuck in my head still, so I'm trying to remember what the real rules are on the fly.
Yeah.
That's my starting point.
After Hurricane Ian hit the West Coast, it taught me a few things on how to handle a hurricane claim. And one of the biggest pitfalls for my associations on the West Coast was being underinsured, not being insured to the replacement value, and not knowing what they had coverages for and what they didn't have coverage for. A lot of my associations did not have coverage for debris removal in their policy at all, which was a huge issue because we had cars that were blocking entrances. We had debris from the ocean. We had debris from everything being destroyed that was preventing us from going in and starting initial mitigation. And those are necessary services in order for you to get your property back up and running. So really knowing your policy is one of the biggest things that I encourage you from a restoration and storm standpoint to understand, and to really sit with your insurance agent every year and say, are we properly covered? Have them walk the property with you to make sure that you have every maintainable item that you are responsible for insured correctly. And sometimes I want to talk about flood too, having flood policies. So Hurricane Ian, the ocean came from the ocean to 7 miles in, and then it rolled back out. And they're built very similar to us. They have a lot of rivers, they have a lot of lakes, they have a lot of water that's over there. And those are also flood risks. So if your policy does not have, or if you don't have a flood policy, it's something that you seriously need to consider, especially if you're a coastal community. It is required some places. I'll let Matt and Paula talk about that more. But if you do not have a flood policy and we get hit by a storm, whether it's a hurricane or a Tuesday afternoon, and you have rising water, and that can even be wind driven rain that falls to the ground, accumulates on your property, and then comes into your property, that's considered flood water. If you do not have a flood policy, you are not covered for that. So I think it's very, very important that you understand the two different sides. You have your wind coverage and then you have your flood coverage. And they're two very different coverages that insure your property correctly. Does that make sense, Matt? Did I do a good job with that?
Yeah, you did. You did. I mean, it's important to know what the cause of loss is, because the key term for flood, and when I say flood, I'm talking about traditionally the FEMA policy. I hear contractors and clients call me, Matt, we had a flood. You know, well, did you have a flood or did a pipe burst? Because those are two very different things when you say them to me. But the rising water is going to be the key term for a flood policy. That doesn't have to be storm surge. That can be rising water that accumulates in, I think, that cover 2 acres, or I have to forget the federal definition of it, but there's a very specific definition of what would meet a flood loss, and then knowing what the differences are between what's covered in your wind versus your flood. So for Aaron's example, debris removal can be included in the wind, but if you have the flood policy, you may not have everything that you would like to have in that, but that's the fun part of a federally provided policy.
You don't want to be relying on FEMA for storm damage. You want to be properly insured. The average payout that I saw on the West Coast was pennies on the dollar for FEMA policies. It was really sad to see so many people that didn't have the funding to get their properties back up and running correctly. I do want to talk a little bit more about the adjuster protocol when it comes to the claims process. Matt, I'm going to let you kind of talk about this. When should they be coming out? Can they use my paperwork now? How does that work?
So this is a tricky one for me, and I kind of have to give you 2 answers. There are absolutely times where public adjusters are needed. I have heard attorneys recently teaching webinars that tell people that they're crazy if they don't use a public adjuster for every claim that they have, and that they're crazy if they think they can negotiate it on their own behalf with the company. I disagree with the extremity of that. There are certainly times they are needed, but in my experience, when I have clients that have used good professional contractors, the contractor has been able to negotiate with that adjuster on their behalf, and they're already getting paid to do the roof. They're not taking an extra, 5, 10, 15% off the top of that full claim payout. So there's kind of the 2 sides of it. I got to be careful, because for me, it's a little bit like tripwire, but there are times adjusters are needed. After the storms, one of my favorite articles, or it wasn't an article, it was a video that was going around on YouTube. They ended up taking it down, but they interviewed a homeowner over in Naples. This homeowner actually happened to be a former board member for the Florida Association of Insurance Agents. And he described the public adjusters that were swarming his neighborhood as trick-or-treaters on Halloween, going door to door, trying to get everybody to sign up for claims, telling them that you'll never get paid by your insurance company unless you hire us. They're not going to give you $1. So you do get the adjusters who use those kinds of scare tactics. And, you don't need a public adjuster to get FEMA to pay you when you had 10 feet of storm surge come into your house. You don't need a specialized adjuster to get the policy limit of whatever the extent of your damage was. Sometimes there's a little more nuance in the claim, and it does make sense, but usually that's a discussion with the client. I don't think you need them from the get-go traditionally.
And I'm in agreement with you, Matt, on there are times that I do see my clients getting taken advantage of by the insurance carriers, and I always will be honest when that happens. But how it works from especially a large loss standpoint or hurricane standpoint, most fire jobs that I do, we have a fire in Palm Beach Gardens that we're working on right now, and we communicate directly with the adjuster that's out on site, and we show them our scope and they write their own scope, and we say, okay, this is both of our clients. Let's agree on something that's mutually beneficial to get them back up and running. And we usually don't get pushback on the front end, the cleanup side at all, with the proper documentation of justifying the work that we do. It's the repair side and the replacement costs of the policy that we have to really work with the carrier on, getting an agreed upon scope of work in dollars. But normally a good restoration company, you should be able to do that, especially one that has a large loss history or a large loss division. That's always a benefit, especially as a business. Because remember, the condominium association is not an individual person basis. It's a business that needs to be run like that. So you have to make financial decisions on your contractors and the people that you're choosing to work with that's best for the business. I do want to jump. Go ahead.
We just had a question come in that piggybacks on that with, should the adjuster be working with the restoration company? Absolutely. Same thing with the roofer. When I've had good roofers and contractors who know what they're doing, sometimes there's a big gap in what the initial offer is from the company, but I've had scenarios where I've told the adjuster and the roofer to go sit down in a room together. I've even offered up my conference room for it. Sit down, go through your proposals together, figure out exactly what's different and come to agreement, and don't come out until you figure it out.
Absolutely.
And I'm thinking of a big fire loss I had years ago, about a $600,000-$700,000 fire loss. They originally offered 300. They sat down together and the contractor showed them exactly why he was using certain materials that the contractor was, I don't want to screw up how I say it, but so the contractor was using maybe lesser materials that weren't quite to code. And when he plugged all that in, they came up with the same calculation and they got the job done for exactly what the contractor proposed it for, and they got paid. So a good contractor is going to pay dividends in the later stages of a claim.
Agreed. It's really important that, especially on fire and large scale projects that are emergencies, your contractor should always be working in tandem with the adjuster. It's a mutually beneficial relationship to make the whole process smoother. And anybody that's not doing that, I would question why. I do want to jump back into the legalities and all the law change that has happened. And Paula, I'm going to start this off with you. I want to talk about SB 2A and the reinsurance in Florida. So I'm going to let you take it from here.
So I just want to go back and touch upon one more thing when we talk about sitting with your insurance agent and making sure that we have the appropriate coverages, because oftentimes some of the damages that occur, law and ordinance. So that's, again, a takeaway point for today. Make sure that you have law and ordinance, because when your older clubhouse burns down and you have no law and ordinance and it was built in 1975, the adjustment on that particular rebuild will be minimal. The windows, everything that you have to think about that has changed in the code will not be covered to the extent of replacement value. So keep that in mind. Again, just a takeaway point, make sure you always have law and ordinance. We saw that a lot in 2004 and 2005 with the hurricanes to our condominiums where they did not have that. And it was very dramatic with respect to the expense that was not covered. You had a huge gap with respect to what your insurance policy covered and what it not for rebuilds. But SB2 insurance, that was the session that was called to address the horrible situation that we're looking at with our condos, co-ops, even homeowners, individual policies, and those increases that we saw. So hopefully, with respect to reinsurance, insurance companies in Florida have the option to purchase reinsurance at reasonable market rates. This is done to prevent additional increases in premiums and timelines reductions. A lot of different things that were in SB2. I think one of the most important is the insurance in Florida. The claims, I think, are, what is it, Matt? There's a statistic. It's like 70% of the claims for litigation actually are in Florida only. For all 50 states, 70% of that for litigation relating to insurance is in Florida. So what the legislation did was it made one-ways attorney's fees in property. Insurance claims have been eliminated, which will reduce attorneys making claims and filing claims for bad faith against insurance companies and other different claims that they claim that were not adjusted properly or paid out properly. So that was eliminated by SB2, which I think is going to make a major difference in Florida. We've already seen, and we have cases right now where we're not going to move against the insurance company because of this. And basically, neither party is awarded prevailing party's attorney's fees, and each party is responsible to pay their own fees. So in the past, when you had a bad faith claim, then you would seek the attorney's fees and the insurance company would end up paying that out just as a matter of, again, business judgment, and pay those attorney's fees. So SB2 eliminated that as well. Also, the deadline for filing a new open claim is reduced from 2 years to 1 year. That's like anything else with the statute of limitations in a sense. And that is, we want to preserve the damages. We want the insurance company to benefit from the immediacy of filing claims. Very important for our condominium associations to understand it's not 2 years, it is 1 year from that event, and knowing when that event occurred, also recording and keeping good documentation about that event. So again, it's 2 years down to 1 year. The time for insurance companies to review and acknowledge a claim is 14 days. So it's within 7 days as opposed to 14 days. So we put a claim in, the insurance company now has 7 days as opposed to 14 days to address and acknowledge that claim. A couple different other things, the period for insurance companies to conduct a physical inspection, which is super important because we saw a lot of this where there was delay. Once a claim is put in, is reduced from 45 days down to 30 days. So SB2 really did a lot, and I'll have Matt kind of jump in here as well with respect to benefiting the insurance companies and addressing claims, which I believe the whole goal behind that was essentially to reduce all of the claims that we have. We see, and I know Matt sees these often so much more than I see them, but the claims where you have a water leak in your condo and the adjustment comes in for the entirety of the wooden floors to be replaced. So what should have been a $3,000 claim now turns into a $25,000 claim. So this SB2 is really kind of set to address all of those types of things, and hopefully the market and the day-to-day business will filter into, hopefully years from now, we have some relief with respect to the cost of insurance because of that. But again, the biggest point was the one-way insurance fees, attorney's fees was reduced. So we've already seen a dramatic reduction in claims filed by attorneys against insurance companies.
So Paula, the statistic you referenced earlier was they did a Florida Association of Insurance Agents did a study, and we accounted for 8% of the total property claims in the entire country across 750 insurers that they surveyed. And we accounted for 76% of the litigated property claims in the entire country. A different study the following year showed that the other 49 states combined had less than 25,000 new property claims. This is in 2021. And the state of Florida alone had 100,000 new litigated insurance claims. So that actually would have brought it, I think, around 82% of the percentage of litigated claims. So 76% was the one I used because at least then it was the lowball number. Nobody could call me a liar for trying to slightly exaggerate the number. So the litigated insurance claims were the big issue. The companies with Senate Bill 2A did get a big boost. It was very favorable for the companies, giving them more affordable reinsurance, attempting to cut down on the litigation. The good side for the associations, they also really put the onus on the company to be more responsive in the time of a claim and not have the ability to drag these things out. So that's the big benefit for the associations in the immediate. Long-term, this should dramatically help the industry. Now, I had a lot of clients saying, well, how soon are we going to see the rates come down? The problem was we had dug ourselves into such a hole as a state with our litigation issues and different companies that there was nothing that the state could have done to provide immediate returns. But we are starting to see a couple new companies dip their toe in the water that had not participated in Florida historically. That's been the first thing that we've been looking for some health, because once a company realizes they're not the only game in town and they can't just charge whatever they want, or you go to Citizens, once you have a couple other companies we can get quotes from, I have competition and I can start negotiating for better terms, better pricing. And it's not just, well, here's our quote, you can have insurance or you can not have insurance, take it or leave it. So it's going to put some power back in my hands to go and negotiate on behalf of the client again. And I'm really excited for that to start happening again, because it's been absolutely miserable delivering some of these renewal increases.
Understood. I do want to do one last topic of conversation before we go to the Q&A section that we have not covered yet, and it's about claim denial. What I see from the restoration standpoint, and I'm going to let Matt and Paula really go insurance and legal on this one, is when I'm dealing with a client that is properly insured and their claim is denied, most of the time it's due to neglect. I highly, highly encourage you as an association to keep accurate maintenance record for every maintainable item that you possibly have on your property. So if you're in a condo building, I want a maintenance log of, let's start with the exterior and the roof, right? If you have HVACs, a cooling tower, I want accurate maintenance records for that. God forbid we get a storm tomorrow and it blows off your building. How do we know if we're going to get the full amount or an adjusted amount? Well, our maintenance records and our proper documentation will help us with that. Then I think about your roof. Do you have a yearly maintenance contractor, an inspection from a licensed and insured company? Then I think about anything else in your building, your elevators, do we have proper maintenance on that? Are they 50 years old and need to be replaced? So these are the things that I think about when I see claims being denied. What is the plan to keep them going, and what accurate maintenance are we doing on them? Matt, perhaps you could talk about the denial of claims and how to avoid that dispute when it happens.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a nuanced conversation because it's going to depend on that specific claim and why the company would be denying it. I would just say it's important to get your ducks in a row as you're filing the claims. You're providing as much accurate and detailed information that you can so they can make the proper determination. Proper information, lack of information can be a reason why a company denies it, and say, well, if you had told us that, this was part of it, that would have changed things. So just getting the information in order and submitting it properly is a big step in the right direction. And, sometimes, to your point, if something hasn't been maintained, the company's going to say, well, we're not covering that. I can give you a bizarre example that's real. Is I had a client who tried to file a hurricane claim for the roofs one year. And when the company said, okay, give us a couple proposals so we know what the estimates are, they gave them a bid for a roof that was dated prior to the hurricane. So the company now had a reason to believe that they had not maintained their roof, and they were just trying to get a free roof out of it, and they ended up with a denial on it. And, I won't go down that rabbit hole. I have a few other comments on that one, but
that just totally sparked my mind. The biggest denial that I see a lot of times from my clients is when we have a flood or an incident that occurs and they have their in-house staff try to take up the water with shop vacs, and then a month later, 2 weeks later, we have a mold issue that's large scale. You have to start the process the right way from the beginning when you're dealing with these incidences that cause damage to your property. Your guys on site are awesome at what they do on the day-to-day maintenance, but when it comes to anything that involves a license, or I think about our mechanicals, our HVAC, do they have a license for that? Our plumbing, do they have a license for that? Do they have the certificates and licensing for mold remediation or dealing with water damage? Anything that involves a license, roofing, for example, like you said. If we're not dealing with those situations with the proper contractors, I see a lot of denials of that. Paula, where do you kind of fit into this mix when we get a claim that's denied?
So at any point in time when you feel like you, as an association, are heading towards a denial or a lower adjustment than what should be required, you do want to involve your legal counsel, certainly. Typically, there is in your policy, there's the requirement to either arbitrate or mediate that particular dispute through a process first. So that process needs to happen quickly. But before you get to that process, you definitely want to have legal counsel putting the insurance company in the position that, again, documentation is key. I can't do much for the fact that your clubhouse burned down and you are missing substantial documentation with respect to what existed before the fire. But at that point in time, your attorney is involved. They're looking through your policy. When it gets to the point that you have to arbitrate or mediate that, then you're going to, again, use your attorney. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you don't have the evidence to support your claim, then there's not much we can do for you for that denial. One of the requirements of the bill also with bad faith denial claims, which happens frequently, that changed as well. So when we have that bad faith denial or reduction, then we have to actually go through a court of competent. We have to go through your court. We have to show that there's actually a basis for bad faith denial. So again, this bill actually created an extra hurdle for denial of insurance claims and then moving through that bad faith process. So you have to have that evidence. You have to be able to show a court that you have evidence of the denial. And that's not just going to be an appraiser or an estimate. You have to have additional evidence for that. And that's the new bill just requires that. So that's another consideration. Aaron, you mentioned it at the outset. All of the evidence that you can bring to that court to even file a claim for bad faith is very important. And it's not just going to be evidence based upon an adjuster's claim that's lower than what the insurance is claiming they're going to provide for the coverage.
Thank you, Paula. I want to jump into some Q&A because there's a couple in here that I really like. And the first one I want to start with, because we didn't talk about it at all. What about a leak that is coming from a window or something that can be replaced, removed, and repaired immediately? What is the association's responsibility in a situation like this? Does the association need to immediately request a mold inspection? I'm going to let you start on the legal side of it, Paula, and then I'll go into the operational side of it.
So for our condominiums and in some degree our co-ops, if there's any co-op listeners today, but our condominiums, the association declaration is going to provide for the obligation to maintain, replace, and repair the windows. Typically, really we see half and half. It could be the owner's obligation, which is going to then, we're going to address that from the owner's perspective for the obligation to repair that leak. If it's the association's obligation, the association needs to obviously go in, maintain the windows with respect to waterproofing. When the leak occurs, if it's, again, going back to the declaration, and this is not statutory, like we have statutory language with respect to pipes and other things, conduits that serve more than one unit, but for windows and doors and openings, it is going to be pursuant to the declaration. So your attorney is going to look back at the declaration and then provide counsel as to who is responsible for that leak or repair. But again, keep in mind, typically the parametrical boundaries of the unit are the unfinished surface of the drywall out. So the association is still involved to address whatever has occurred to that drywall in that particular circumstance or example for windows or doors.
And just to further clarify that, Paula, what if you have a unit owner that their sliding glass doors are leaking into the unit below and their declaration and their bylaws, everything says that that's a maintainable item of the unit owner? What can the association do to step in to force them to take care of the issue that's causing damage to the unit below?
So first thing, do not ignore it and do not live in the land of thinking the owner who said they were going to do it 2 years ago is going to do it this year after you have written the letter to them. The association at some point in time, if it's an owner obligation for that leaky sliding door that's 35 years old, to typically in our declarations, we have the ability to force someone to repair and replace and maintain their unit so that it does not cause damage to the common elements or other units. That at that point in time, you need to move forward either to obtain an injunction requiring the owner to replace that leaky door, or there may be some mitigating activities we can take to even waterproof it from the association's point of view. But what I typically see in that example, Aaron, is board of directors allowing a unit owner to stall, delay, and not maintain their door or replace it as required. So from the association's point of view, you definitely have the legal, either through your declaration to go in, repair, replace it, or you have to go through the courts to obtain an injunction requiring that owner to repair, replace it, and also seek your attorney's fees and additional damages to the common elements and that unit owner below.
Awesome. I want to kind of continue down the same page because there's been a lot of questions on the main line of a building. So let's say sewer, right? If there's a backup in the main line of the sewer, who is responsible for the cleanup of that backup?
So when a backup occurs, in your example, that's going to be the association's obligation immediately to clean it up and then to remediate those portions of the common elements the association is responsible for. When we have examples like that, then you start to look at negligence. Was the association negligent in maintaining that line? Or has the association maintained that line regularly and has the records showing that that's just something that happens from time to time, unfortunately. So if there's additional damages outside that drywall, that's when we really get into the fluid situation of, does the association go in and start maintaining and replacing the damaged areas that are not the common elements? Ultimately, again, if it's a line that we have evidence that is regularly maintained and there's no negligence, we tell the owner there is no negligence here, and it's the owner's obligation for those portions of the units or their personal contents to replace, clean, etc.
Awesome. I do want to jump back into this discussion that we started at the beginning of the call. There was several questions on how do you force unit owners to get homeowners policies if it's not in the condo docs? And before you answer that, I want to be super, super clear with everybody on this call. If you are in a condo or a co-op, it's not a matter of if you're going to have a water damage situation, it's when it's going to happen. And I think that when we explain the why behind why it's so important to have that, it goes a lot farther. But Paula, what can they do to help?
So the requirement or requiring an owner to have an HO6, maintain that HO6, and also prove that they have it, that they haven't canceled it after they've shown you 30 days later, after they've shown you the evidence of purchasing it, that would be a declaration amendment. So can you put it in the rules and regulations? Because you can't, there's a high threshold to amend your deck. You can and require it, but it's just not going to hold as much teeth if you actually have to force that owner to maintain the HO6 policy. I strongly recommend, if you're going to do any amendments for a condo or co-op, you're going to require the HO6 policy. And Matt can kind of give into this too as well. You're also going to require upgrades to certain components of the interior of the unit, like the electric box. So we've seen a lot in the last 2 years, where the association's policy requires the individual unit owners to have updated electric box components, fuses, whatever. That's also something you can put in that amendment. Also requiring inspections or replacements of water heaters that are at a certain age. That can be an amendment to your declaration. So it's kind of like a housekeeping amendment, requiring the HO6 for individual owners. Individuals also have to upgrade their electric boxes. And then we look at water heaters and other components of aging buildings where unit owners would then be required to replace those components that are typically increasing the risk or are creating the water damage or other risk with respect to electric, etc.
Thank you, Paula. We have a really good question. This is going to be a two-pronged, me and you, Matt. Does it make sense to set up a meeting with you and an insurance carrier prior to a loss to mutually agree upon scopes of work, equipment, and labor costs? From my standpoint, I can start with. So from the restoration standpoint, when we're talking about the cost of a project prior to a storm, of a water event happening at your property, we use a tool from the insurance carrier. It's called Xactimate. It's the tool for billing that is based on the zip code of your property, that the insurance company will pay out based on that. We use that tool, and there's another side of billing that we use called time and materials. The day-to-day small stuff that you're going to have unit owner to unit owner losses, Xactimate is a tool for billing everybody should be using. When it comes to large losses, the time and materials is actually a better way to figure out what the bill should be, and the insurance company likes it because it costs less money, in a nutshell. But what is important, that if you're using contractors that are not using Xactimate, it tells me that they can't afford the bill. It's a cost to use the insurance company's tool for billing that we absorb as a company. And it's a problem if your contractor is not using that tool for the majority of your losses. With regards to
me, it usually means your contractor is not used to dealing with insurance claims.
Yes.
And that can be a problem. The Xactimate is how the adjuster and the contractor can speak the same language, because you can put the two estimates down next to each other and go line by line to see what it is that they're estimating and where the differences are coming from. And that's gone such a long ways in meeting in the middle, or explaining to the adjuster why the contractor's Xactimate is actually correct. And I used an example of that earlier, where they just said, okay, well, we're required to do this code, and that requires this material. And then we were able to get it resolved for the client. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that was a really good point on exactament I wanted to hit.
Absolutely. With regards of setting up meetings with carriers prior to events happening, I can't speak for other restoration companies, but the rapid response team, we have relationships with the biggest carriers in the state of Florida that hold the vast amount of your insurance policies. We work with them on a daily and consistent basis, especially your large loss adjusters. That is a specialized adjuster that's going to come out to your property post-storm that is specific to what they're doing. And we see the same people that have been in the industry for the past 30 years. So we probably already know the people that you're currently working with. And our largest client in the insurance world in the entire state of Florida is Citizens Insurance. So if that gives you perspective on what we do, I hope that helps answer the question a little bit. Let's see what else we have here. We had a lot of questions about impact versus non-impact windows leaking during Ian. Association paid for drywall repair. Windows are owner's responsibility per our docs. If we have another storm, is the association required to pay again for all the drywall in those same units? Who wants to field this first?
Well, that was a lot. It was like,
Love windows.
that was like kind of word salad, Erin. Ultimately, impact windows versus standard windows. Keep in mind 718 does provide the board of directors a great discretion with respect to requiring impact windows. So if the association is obviously responsible for the windows repair replacement, the association board of directors can vote and obviously change those windows out to be impact. And I'll let Matt touch upon that because he's going to tell you about the importance of perhaps doing that for your entire building. If the association, if the windows are the responsibility of the unit owners, the board of directors can put a vote to require all replacement of windows by a time certain to be impact glass. And that's a majority of the owners voting in person at a meeting. So you have a quorum and you have a majority of those owners voting in favor of requiring every unit owner to replace their windows and doors with impact glass. So very important. Again, 718 gives you broad discretion to have that happen. We have many associations that have, let's say 80% of the owners have impact glass, 20% do not. So obviously that's going to be a very easy vote to attain so that you have your entire condominium unit owner windows replaced with impact glass. And that would be an amendment that provides for a time certain.
Okay, operationally, I just want everybody on this call to understand what an impact glass window actually means. So an impact glass window is not rated for water prevention. It's water resistant. And I just had my PGT windows installed in my house this past year. They're rated for 45 minutes at 120 miles an hour of wind-driven rain before intrusion will happen from water. You have weep holes in the bottom of these windows. So you have to plan when we are going to have storm season come that you will have wind-driven rain for sustained wind over time. So there will be water intrusion. So as an association, if you know that during Irma, you had water intrusion coming through the windows and doors, my suggestion operationally would be to, as an association, make a decision that we want to prevent this from happening. And there's products out there that will help prevent that. There's water snake. Pig products happen to be my personal favorite. I use it in my home. They have water mats, water snakes, and prevention items that can limit the water that impacts your drywall. And I think that that might be the approach that you want to take to prevent that from happening again. There's a lot of really great tools that are out there. There's another great product I like called a water dam. If you have a garage that floods, if you have a pool area or a door to your building that floods and you know that it's going to happen if we get storm surge, those are things that you want to think about investing in for long term, so it doesn't continue to happen. We're getting towards the end of this call. I do want to go over a few things. I know that we had a lot of talk about licensed person to inspect a house or a unit if gone for more than 2 weeks. There's home watch services, what we call them, that are out there, and they're licensed to take care of the home while you're out of town. If you email me after this call, I'll give you a couple good referrals of people in your area that do it. What we like to see, and I know that Paula and Matt like to see this too, is the license that's attached to that home watch service, because should something happen, they're licensed and insured, and Paula can go after them on your behalf as the association, or the unit owner can go after them. There's somebody there to put some teeth into to pay a bill. If you have Mrs. Jones on the second floor who is 75 years old and she checks on your unit every 2 weeks, and you get a mold bloom or a leak happens and she doesn't catch it because she was visiting her son in Kentucky, then you have nobody to really blame for the damage that happens within that unit occurring. Right, Paula?
Right. And yes, correct. You always want to make sure any contractor that you use is insured, and the association, if to the extent that the contractor is working substantially in your unit, can be and should be named as an additional insured. But I want to point out something important again that we see often, and that is the association allowing their individual manager or maintenance person to go into units from time to time, which again shifts that obligation, and if damage should occur, back to the association. So we want to avoid allowing that. And again, we see it often just because people obviously build relationships with maintenance individuals or managers, but we want to make it clear from the start that the manager or maintenance individual should not be checking on units outside of the association's obligation to check on a unit should something occur. But as far as doing work in the unit or providing that service, if you're a snowbird, to check on it from time to time or every week, what have you, it should not fall back to the association's obligation, because if something does occur, it's going to go directly back to the association's liability on that.
Something I've seen a lot of associations do, especially if you have that transient population in the building, is require owners to turn the water off once they're gone for an X amount of days as part of the rules and regs. And then require in the rules and regs to have a home watch set up if they're gone for a certain amount of time. That way, if somebody doesn't do either of those things, and then there's a pipe leak 6 months later, an 8th grade science project, you have something to go back and point to saying the owner was responsible for having this looked after while they were gone, and they failed to do it, and it's not our fault because they failed to follow the rules.
Thank you, Matt. I want to circle back to who's responsible again, Paula. We keep getting on who's responsible for what damages. And this is in regards to large loss. From an operational standpoint, when I'm called by a property to come out, it's 2:30 in the morning, flood occurs on the 17th floor and goes all the way down. We don't know where the water is coming from. My recommendation is that the association take immediate reaction, because even though a unit owner could have caused the damage, the association still needs to maintain the control of the building and the project. But Paula, what is your opinion from the legal standpoint?
Yeah, I'm smiling because that, if anyone takes anything away from today, it is the association's obligation to immediately respond and immediately address the common element damage. It does not matter whether it was a unit owner's negligence or not, period. The association is obligated to go in and to start addressing the damage and remediating and making sure further damage doesn't occur. But typically what we see when it reaches my desk is it's been 2 weeks or 3 weeks, the association knew the damage occurred and did not address it immediately because it was the unit owner's fault. That is not part of the equation. It was the unit owner's fault. So just take that out of the equation. The association understands the damage occurred. Again, the 2:30 in the morning example, it's the association's manager that's there making sure that it's going to go in, it's going to address the damage, and it's going to make sure that, again, not only limited to common elements, sometimes we go beyond that to address additional damages in other units where the damage occurred. So the takeaway point is this: the association does not get a free pass to claim that it was the owner's fault. The association is responsible to maintain those common elements, and it needs to immediately address any water damage or any other types of damage, whether or not it was an owner's fault or not. If it was an owner's negligence, we're going to go back and look at that. I gave you guys the example of the elevator shaft, substantial damage, but again, the association goes in immediately to remediate it and then move forward with respect to the drywall and other obligations. And of course, then calling Matt at 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure he understands that there's going to be a major claim.
Thank you, Paula. And I think that it's important to understand from the association standpoint that when you are dealing with the dry out. So look, we talk about extremes, but even if you have a leak between 3 units and a unit owner's toilet that's not there is backing up or whatever the situation is, you need to partner with a restoration company that understands Florida state statute, and making sure that you're vetting your vendors, that if you are in a condominium building, that you know that they understand that the drywall is the association's responsibility, and the interior, if there's wood flooring, laminate flooring, that I need to contract with the individual unit owner for either repair, removal, or replacement. That is not going to be an association expense. So having those conversations and working with the right partners prior to the event happening is part of your planning and what you need to be having done now. And if you do have special conditions, I have a couple buildings across the state of Florida that their documents give them more responsibility than 718. If your documents give you more responsibility, then you better be following those documents. So it's going to be more the higher end communities, but I've got some communities that are responsible for their windows and doors, but it's all individualized. One last question. I do want to touch on an HOA issue, and this is probably going to be thrown to you, Max. We do have a couple HOA people on this call. That we have a person that had rising water during the most recent heavy rains. They're in an HOA with attached villas. Can there be coverage from FEMA, and how do they know if they have mold under their wood floors? I'll take the mold part if you want to take the insurance part.
Yeah, so HOAs get trickier because it all depends on what's in your bylaws. Flood for HOAs, they're really weird, especially if you're in a townhome or villa style building, where it depends on if the bylaws make it responsibility of the homeowner to purchase the policy or the homeowners association. If the homeowners association has to do it, each unit basically has to be its own flood policy. I can't write one policy for the whole building for HOAs. So if you have a 160 home HOA, you end up with 160 different flood policies. So if you have that, then yeah, the FEMA policy, as long as you meet the definitions of flood for that event, it should kick in. But that's also talking in general on how the flood claim should work. And Aaron, if you want to address the mold underneath the wood, I'm sure there's a way you can try to test for it. Absolutely.
No matter where mold is in your unit, there's only one person who holds a license. Well, there's multiple people that hold the license, but there is a profession called a licensed mold assessor. And a licensed mold assessor is the only person that can determine if something is mold or if it is not mold, where it is located, and they are responsible for writing a report after. Determining all those factors. So if you'd like more information on that, I'd be more than happy to email you on the side. You can pick up the phone and call me, and I can walk you through the process of determining if you have mold under your floor or anywhere in your house or condo or common element anywhere. I guess this is the end of our time now. I really want to thank everybody for staying on here. You guys have had awesome questions. We appreciate your time for being here the last hour and a half. If there's any questions we did not address specifically in the group chat, we will be reaching out to you, and also feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may or may not have. I also want to thank Katie Phillips, who is also on this call monitoring our group chat. She is the education director for Rosenbaum PLLC. She's a great resource if anybody has questions regarding any association management. She's been in this industry longer than I have, and she gets a lot of calls from me too. Thank you, Paula. Thank you, Matt. I really appreciate you doing this call with us today. And like I said, if you guys need anything at all, please feel free to ask. We're always here to be at your disposal as a resource. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Matt. And thank you all for joining.
Fun as always. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.